Hello and welcome to our reading of the final part of Book 1, Native Son. Ooh, there we go, Native Son. All right, so we are at the bottom of 62 and Bigger and Mary are in the car and he is taking her to school. He watched her through the rear mirror as he drove. She was kind of pretty, but very little. She looked like a doll in a show window, black eyes, white face, red lips. And she was not acting at all now as she had acted when he first saw her. In fact, she had a remote look in her eyes. He stopped the car at 47th Street for a red light. He did not have to stop again until he reached 51st Street, where a long line of cars formed in front of him and a long line in back. He held the steering wheel lightly, waiting for the line to move forward. He had a keen sense of power when driving. The feel of a car added something to him. He loved to press his foot against a pedal and sail along, watching others stand still, seeing the asphalt road unwind under him. The lights flashed from red to green, and he nosed the car forward. Bigger! Yes'm. Turn at this corner and pull up on a side street. Here, ma'am? Yes, here. Now, what on earth did this mean? He pulled the car off Cottage Grove Avenue and drew to a curb. He turned to look at her and was startled to see that she was sitting on the sheer edge of the back seat, her faces some 6 inches from his. I scare you? She asked softly, smiling. Oh, no, he mumbled, bewildered. He watched through the mirror. Her tiny white hands dangled over the back of the front seat, and her eyes looked out vacantly. I don't know how to say what I'm going to say, she said. He said nothing. There was a long silence. What in all hell did this girl want? A streetcar rumbled by. Behind him, reflected in the rear mirror, he saw the traffic lights flash from green to red and back again. Well, whatever it was she was going to say, he wished she would say it and get it over. This girl was strange. She did the unexpected every minute. He waited for her to speak. She took her hands from the back of the front seat and fumbled in her purse. Got a match? Yes'm. He dug a match from his pocket. Strike it, she said. He blinked. He struck the match and held the flame for her. She smoked a while in silence. You're not a tattletale, are you? She asked with a smile. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. What she asked and the tone of voice in which she asked made it feel as he ought to answer in some way. But what? I'm not going to the university, she said at last. But you can forget that. I want you to drive me to the loop. But if anyone should ask you, I went to the university. See, Bigger? Yes'm, it's all right with me, he mumbled. I think I can trust you. Yes'm. After all, I'm on your side. Now, what did that mean? She was on his side. What side was he on? Did she mean that she liked colored people? Well, he had heard that about her whole family. Was she really crazy? How much did her folks know of how she acted? But if she were really crazy, why did Mr. Dalton let her drive him out? Let him drive her out. I'm going to meet a friend of mine, who's also a friend of yours, she said. Friend of mine, he could not help exclaiming. Oh, you don't know him yet, she said, laughing. Oh. Go to the outer drive and then to 16 Lake Street. Yes'm. Maybe she was talking about the Reds. That was it. But none of his friends were Reds. What was all of this? If Mr. Dalton should ask him if he had taken her to the university, he would have to say yes and depend on her to back him up. But suppose Mr. Dalton had someone watching, someone who would tell where he had really taken her. He had heard that many rich people had detectives working for them. If he only knew what this was all about, he would feel much better. And she had said that she was going to meet someone who was a friend of his. He didn't want to meet any communists. They didn't have any money. He felt that it was all right for a man to go to jail for robbery, but to go to jail for fooling around with Reds was bunk. Well, he would drive her. That was what he had been hired for. But he was going to watch his step in this business. The only thing he hoped that she would not make him lose. The only thing he hoped was that she would not make him lose his job. He pulled the car off Outer Drive at 7th Street, drove north on Michigan Boulevard to Lake Street, then headed west for 2 blocks, looking for number 16. "It's right here, Bigger." "Yes'm." He pulled to a stop in front of the dark building. "Wait," she said, getting out of the car. He saw her smiling broadly at him, almost laughing. He felt that she knew every feeling and thought he had at the moment, and he turned his head away in confusion. God damn that woman. "I won't be long," she said. She started off, then turned back. "Take it easy, Bigger. You'll understand better by and by." "Yes'm," he said, trying to smile but couldn't. "Isn't there a song like that? A song your people sing?" "Like what, ma'am?" "We'll understand it better by and by." "Oh, yes'm." She was an odd girl, all right. He felt something in her over above the fear she inspired in him. She responded to him as if he were human, as if he lived in the same world as she, and he had never felt that before in a white person. But why? Was this some kind of game? The guarded feeling of freedom that he had while listening to her was tangled with the hard fact that she was white and rich, a part of the world of people who told him what he could and could not do. He looked at the building into which she had gone, and it was old and unpainted. There were no lights in the windows or doorway. Maybe she was meeting with her sweetheart. If that was all, then things would straighten out. But if she had gone to meet with those communists, what were communists like anyway? Was she one? What made people communists? He remembered seeing many cartoons of communists in newspapers, and always they had flaming torches in their hands and wore beards and were trying to commit murder or set things on fire. The people who acted that way were crazy. All he could recall, having heard about communists, was associated in his mind with darkness, old houses, people speaking in whispers, and trade unions on strike. And this was something like it. He stiffened. The door into which she had gone opened. She came out, followed by a young white man. They walked to the car, but instead of getting into the back seat, they came right to the side of the car and stood facing him. At once, Bigger recognized the man as the one he had seen in the newsreel in the movie. "Oh, Bigger, this is Jan. And Jan, this is Bigger Thomas." Jan smiled broadly, then extended an open palm toward him. Bigger's entire body tightened with suspense and dread. "How are you, Bigger?" Bigger's right hand gripped the steering wheel, and he wondered if he ought to shake hands with this white man. "I'm fine," he mumbled. Jan's hand was still extended. Bigger's right hand raised itself about 3 inches and then stopped in midair. Bigger extended a limp palm, his mouth open in astonishment. He felt Jan's hand tighten about his own. He tried to pull his hand away ever so gently, but Jan held on firmly, smiling. "We may as well get to know each other," Jan said. "I'm a friend of Mary's." "Yes'm," he mumbled. "First of all," Jan continued, putting his foot up on the running board, "don't say sir to me. I'll call you Bigger, and you call me Jan. That's the way it'll be between us. How's that?" Bigger did not answer. Mary was smiling. Jan still gripped his hand, and Bigger felt his head at an oblique angle so that he could, merely by shifting his eyes, look at Jan and then out into the street whenever he did not wish to meet Jan's gaze. He heard Mary laughing softly. "It's all right, Bigger. Jan means it." He flushed warm with anger. God damn her soul to hell. Was she laughing at him? Were they making fun of him? What was it they wanted? Why didn't they leave him alone? He was not bothering them. Yes, anything could happen with people like these. His entire mind and body were both painfully concentrated into a single sharp point of attention. He was trying desperately to understand. He felt foolish sitting behind the steering wheel like this and letting a white man hold his hand. What would people passing along the street think? He was very conscious of his black skin, and there was in him a prodding conviction that Jan and men like him had made it so that he would be conscious of his black skin. Did not white people despise a black skin? Then why was Jan doing this? Why was Mary standing there so eagerly with shining eyes? What could they get out of this? Maybe they did not despise him, but they made him feel his black skin just by standing there, looking at him, one holding his hand and the other smiling. He had no physical existence at all right then. He was something he hated, the badge of shame which he knew was attached to black skin. It was a shadowy region, a no man's land, the ground that separated the white world from the black that he stood upon. He felt naked, transparent. He felt that this white man, having helped to put him down, having helped to deform him, held him up now to look at him and be amused. At that moment, he felt toward Mary and Jan a dumb, cold, inarticulate hate. "Let me drive a while," Jan said, letting go of his hand and opening the door. Bigger looked at Mary. She came forward and touched his arm. "It's all right, Bigger," she said. He turned in the seat to get out, but Jan stopped him. "No, stay in, move over." He slid over and Jan took his place at the wheel. He was still feeling his hand strangely. It seemed that the pressure of Jan's fingers had left an indelible imprint. Mary was getting into the front seat. "Move over, Bigger," she said. He moved closer to Jan. Mary pushed herself in, wedging tightly between him and the outer door of the car. There were white people to either side of him. He was sitting between two vast, white looming walls. Never in his life had he been so close to a white woman. He smelt the odor of her hair and felt the soft pressure of her thigh against his own. Jan headed to the car back to Outer Drive, weaving in and out of the line of traffic. Soon they were speeding along the lakefront, past a huge flat sheet of dully gleaming water. The sky was heavy with snow clouds, and the wind was blowing strong. "Isn't it glorious tonight?" she asked. "God, yes," Jan said. Bigger listened to the tone of their voices, to the strange accents, to the exuberant phrases that flowed so freely from their lips. "That's sky, and that's water. It's so beautiful, it makes you just ache to look at it," said Mary. "This is a beautiful world, Bigger," Jan said, turning to him. "Look at that skyline." Bigger looked without turning his head. He just rolled his eyes. Stretching to one side of him was a vast sweep of tall buildings flecked with tiny squares of yellow light. "We'll all own that someday, Bigger," Jan said with a wave of his hand. "After the revolution, it'll be ours. But we'll have to fight for it. What a world to win, Bigger! And when that day comes, things will be different. There'll be no white and no black. There'll be no rich and no poor." Bigger said nothing. The car whirled along. "We seem strange to you, don't we, Bigger?" "Oh, no," he breathed softly, knowing that she did not believe him, but finding it impossible to answer her in any other way. His arms and legs were aching from being cramped into such a small place, but he dared not move. He knew that they would not have cared if he made himself more comfortable, but his moving would have called attention to himself and his black body. And he did not want that. These people made him feel things he did not want to feel. If he were white, if he were like them, it would have been different. But he was black, so he sat still, his arms and legs aching. "Say, Bigger," asked Jan, "where can we go to get a good meal on the south side?" Well," Bigger said reflectively, "we want to go to a real place," Mary said, turning to him gaily. "No, we want to eat. Look, Bigger, we want one of those places where colored people eat, not one of those show places." What did these people want? His voice answered, neutral and toneless. "Well, there's Ernie's Chicken Shack." "That sounds good. Let's go there, Jan," Mary said. "Okay," Jan said. "Where is it?" "It's 47th Street in Indiana," Bigger told them. Jan swung the car off Outer Drive at 31st Street and drove westward to Indiana Avenue. Bigger wanted Jan to drive faster so they could reach Ernie's Kitchen Shack in the shortest time possible. That would allow him a chance to sit in the car and stretch out his cramped and aching legs while they ate. Jan turned onto Indiana Avenue and headed south. Bigger wondered what Jack, Gus, and GH would say if they saw him sitting between the two white people in a car like this. They would tease him about such a thing as long as they could remember it. He felt Mary turn in her seat. She placed her hand on his arm. You know, Bigger, I have long wanted to go into these houses, she said, pointing to the tall, dark apartment buildings looming up either side of them, and just see how you people live. You know what I mean? I've been to England, France, Mexico, but I don't know how people live 10 blocks from me. We know so little about each other. But I want to see. I want to know these people. Never in my life have I ever been inside a Black person's home. They must live like we live. They're human. There are 12 million of them. They live in our country, in the same city with us. Her voice trailed off wistfully. There was silence. The car sped through the black belt, past tall buildings holding Black life. Bigger knew that they were thinking of his life and the life of his people. Suddenly, he wanted to seize some heavy object in his hand and grip it with all of his strength and body, and in some strange way rise up and stand in naked space above the speeding car, and with one final blow blot it out, with himself and with them in it. His heart was beating fast, and he struggled to control his breath. This thing was getting the better of him. He felt that he should not give way to his feelings like this, but he could not help it. Why didn't they leave him alone? What had they done to him? What had he done to them? What good could they get out of sitting here and making him feel so miserable? Tell me where it is, Bigger, Jan said. Yes, sir. Bigger looked out and saw that they were at 46th Street. It's at the end of the next block, sir. Can I park along here somewhere? Oh, yes, sir. Bigger, please don't say sir to me. I don't like it. You're a man, just like I am. I'm no better than you. Maybe other white men like it, but I don't. Look, Bigger. Yes, Bigger paused, swallowed, and looked down at his black hands. Okay, he mumbled, hoping that they did not hear the choke in his voice. You see, Bigger, Jan began. Mary reached her hand round of Bigger and touched Jan's shoulder. Let's get out, she said hurriedly. Jan pulled the car to the curb and opened the door and stepped out. Bigger slipped behind the steering wheel again, glad to have room at last for his arms and legs. Mary got out of the other door. Now he could get some rest. So intensely taken up he was with his own immediate sensations that he did not look up until he felt something strange in the long silence. When he did look, he saw, in a split second of time, Mary turn her eyes away from his face. She was looking at Jan, and Jan was looking at her. There was no mistaking the meaning of the look in their eyes. To Bigger, it was plainly a bewildered and questioning look that asked, "What on earth is wrong with him?" Bigger's teeth clamped tight, and he stared straight before him. "Aren't you coming with us, Bigger?" Mary asked in a sweet tone that made him want to leap at her. The people in Ernie's chicken shack knew him, and he did not want them to see him with these white people. He knew that if he went in, they would ask one another, "Who are them white folks Bigger's hanging around with?" I don't want to go in, he whispered breathlessly. "Aren't you hungry?" Jan asked. "No, I ain't hungry." Jan and Mary came close to the car. "Come and sit with us anyhow," Jan said. Bigger stammered. "It'll be all right," Mary said. "I can stay here. Somebody has to watch the car," he said. "Oh, to hell with the car," Mary said. "Come on in." "I don't want to eat," Bigger said stubbornly. "Well," Jan sighed, "if that's the way you feel about it, we won't go in." Bigger felt trapped. God damn. He saw in a flash that he could have made this all very easy if he just simply acted from the beginning as if they were doing nothing unusual. But he did not understand them. He distrusted them. He really hated them. He was puzzled as to why they were treating him this way. But after all, this was his job, and it was just as painful to sit here and let them stare at him as it was to go in. "Okay," he mumbled angrily. He got out and slammed the door. Mary came close to him and caught his arm. He stared at her in a long silence, and it was the first time he had ever looked directly at her. He was able to do so only because he was angry. "Bigger," she said, "you don't have to come in unless you really want to. Please don't think—" "Oh, Bigger, We're not trying to make you feel badly. Her voice stopped. In the dim light of the street lamp, Bigger saw her eyes cloud and lips tremble. She swayed against the car. He stepped backward as though she were contaminated with an invisible contagion. Jan slipped his arm about her waist, supporting her. Bigger heard her sob softly. God, good God, he had a wild impulse to turn around and walk away. He felt ensnared in a tangle of deep shadows, shadows as black as the night that stretched above his head. The way he had acted had made her cry, and yet the way she acted had made him feel that he had to act as he had acted toward her. In his relations with her, he felt that he was riding a seesaw. Never were they on the same common level. Seesaw metaphor. Either he or she was up in the air. Mary dried her eyes, and Jan whispered something to her. Bigger wondered what he could say to his mother or the relief or Mr. Dalton if he left them. They would be sure to ask why he'd walked off his job, and he would not be able to tell. I'm all right now, Jan, he heard Mary say. I'm sorry. I'm just a fool. I suppose I acted a ninny. She lifted her eyes to Bigger. Don't mind me, Bigger. I'm just silly, I guess. He said nothing. Come on, Bigger, Jan said in a voice that sought to cover up everything. Let's eat. Jan caught his arm and tried to pull him forward, but Bigger hung back. Jan and Mary walked toward the entrance of the cafe, and Bigger followed, confused and resentful. Jan went to a small table near a wall. Sit down, Bigger. Bigger sat. Jan and Mary sat in front of him. You like fried chicken? Jan asked. Yes, sir, he whispered. He scratched his head. How on earth could he learn not to say yes, sir, yes'm to white people in one night when he had been saying it his whole life long? He looked before him in such a way that his eyes would not meet theirs. Their waitress came, and Jan ordered 3 beers and 3 portions of fried chicken. Hi, Bigger. He turned and saw Jack waving at him, but staring at Jan and Mary. He waved a stiff palm in return. God damn. Jack walked away hurriedly. Cautiously, Bigger looked around. The waitresses and several people at their other tables were staring at him. They all knew him, and he knew that they were wondering, as he would have wondered, if he had been in their places. Mary touched his arm. Have you ever been here before, Bigger? He groped for neutral words, words that would convey information but not indicate any shade of his own feelings, a few times. It's very nice, Mary said. Somebody put a nickel in an automatic phonograph, and they listened to music. Then Bigger felt a hand grip his shoulder. Hey, Bigger, where you been? He looked up and saw Bessie laughing in his face. Hi, he said gruffly. Oh, excuse me. I didn't know you had company, she said, walking away with her eyes on Jan and Mary. Tell her to come over, Bigger, Mary said. Bessie had gone to a far table and was sitting with another girl. She's over there now, Bigger said. The waitress brought the beer and chicken. This is simply grand, Mary exclaimed. You got something there, Jan said, looking at Bigger. Did I say that right, Bigger? Bigger hesitated. That's the way they say it, he spoke flatly. Jan and Mary were eating. Bigger picked up a piece of chicken and bit it. When he tried to chew it, he found his mouth dry. It seemed that the very organic functions of his body had altered. And when he realized why, when he understood the cause, he could not chew the food. After 2 or 3 bites, he stopped, sipped his beer. Eat your chicken, Mary said. It's good. I ain't hungry, he mumbled. Want some more beer? Jan said after a long silence. Maybe if he got a little drunk, it would help him. I don't mind. Jan ordered another round. Do they keep anything stronger than beer around here? Jan asked. I got anything you want, Bigger said. Jan ordered a 5th of rum and poured around. Bigger felt the liquor warming him. After a second drink, Jan began to talk. Where were you born, Bigger? In the South. Whereabouts? Mississippi. How far did you go in school? The 8th grade. Why'd you stop? No money. Did you go to school in the North or the South? Mostly in the South. I went 2 years up here. How long you been in Chicago? Oh, about 5 years. You like it here? It'll do. You live with your people? My mother, brother, sister. Where's your father? Dead. How long ago was that? He got killed in a riot when I was a kid in the South. There was silence. The rum was helping Bigger. And what was done about it? Jan asked. Nothing as far as I know. How do you feel about it? I don't know. Listen, Bigger, that's what we want to stop. That's what we communists are fighting. We want to stop people from treating others that way. I'm a member of the party. Mary sympathizes. Don't you think if we got together, we could stop things like that? I don't know, Bigger said. He was feeling the rum rising to his head. There's a lot of white people in the world. You've read about the Scottsboro boys? I heard about them. Don't you think we did a good job in helping them keep from killing those boys? It was all right. You know, Bigger, said Mary. We'd like to be friends of yours. He said nothing. He drained his glass and Jan poured another round. He was getting drunk enough to look straight at them now. Mary was smiling at him. You'll get used to us, she said. Jan stoppered the bottle of rum. We'd better go, he said. Yes, Mary said. Oh, Bigger, I'm going to Detroit at 9 in the morning, and I want to tell you to take my small trunk down to the station. Tell Father, and he'll let you make up your time. You'd better come for the trunk at 8:30. I'll take it down. Jan paid the bill, and they went back to the car. Bigger got behind the steering wheel. He was feeling good. Jan and Mary in the back seat. As Bigger drove, he saw her resting in Jan's arms. Drive around the park a while, will you, Bigger? Okay. He turned into Washington Park and pulled the car slowly round and round the long, gradual curves. Now and then he watched Jan kiss Mary in the reflection of the rear-view mirror above his head. You got a girl, Bigger, Mary asked. I got a girl, he said. I'd like to meet her sometime. He did not answer. Mary's eyes stared dreamily before her as if she were planning future things to do. She turned to Jan and laid her hand tenderly upon his arm. How was the demonstration? Pretty good. The cops arrested 3 comrades. Who were they? A.Y., C. Eller, and 2 black women. Oh, by the way, Mary, we need money for bail badly. How much? 3,000. I'll mail you a check. Swell. Did you work hard today? Yeah, I was at a meeting until 3 this morning. Max and I have been trying to raise bail money all day today. Max is a darling, isn't he? He's one of the best lawyers we've got. Bigger listened. He knew they were talking communism, and he tried to understand, but he couldn't. Jan, yes, honey, I'm coming out of school this spring, and I'm going to join the party. Gee, you're a brick, but I'll have to be careful. Say, how's about you working with me in the office? No, I want to work among the black people. That's where people are needed. It seems as though they've been pushed out of everything. That's true. When I see what they've done to those people, it makes me so mad. Yes, it's awful. And I feel so helpless and useless. I want to do something. I knew all along you'd come through. Say, Jan, do you know many black people? I want to meet some. I don't know any very well, but you'll meet them when you're... Oh, sorry. This is Mary asking Jan if he knows black people. And he says, I don't know any very well, but you'll meet them when you're in the party. They have so much emotion. What a people. If we could ever get them going. Can't have a revolution without them, Jan said. They've got to be organized. They've got spirit. They'll give the party something it needs. And their songs, the spirituals, aren't they marvelous? Bigger saw her turn to him. Say, Bigger, can you sing? I can't sing, he said. Oh, Bigger, she said, pouting. She tilted her head, closed her eyes, and opened her mouth. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. Sorry, don't sing. Jan joined in, and Bigger smiled derisively. Hell, that ain't the tune, he thought. Come on, Bigger, and help us sing it, Jan said. I can't sing. They were silent. The car purred along. Then he heard Jan speaking in low tones. Where's the bottle? Right here. I want a sip. I'll take one too, honey. Going heavy tonight, ain't you? About as heavy as you. They laughed. Bigger drove in silence. He heard the faint musical gurgle of liquor. Jan, what? That was a big sip. Here, you get even. Through the rear mirror, he saw her tilt the bottle and drink. Maybe Bigger wants another, Jan. Ask him. Oh, say Bigger. Here, take a swig. He slowed the car and reached back for the bottle. He tilted it twice, taking 2 huge swallows. Wow, Mary laughed. You took a swig, all right, Jan said. Bigger wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and continued driving slowly through the dark park. Now and then he heard the half-empty bottle of rum gurgling. They getting plastered, and he thought, feeling the effect of the rum creeping outward to his fingers and upwards to his lips. Presently, he heard Mary giggle. Hell, she's plastered already. The car rolled slowly around and round the sloping curves. The rum's soft heat was spreading fan-wise from his stomach, engulfing his whole body. He was not driving. He was simply sitting and floating along smoothly through darkness. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, and his body slouched lazily down in the seat. He looked at the mirror. Mary was lying flat on her back in the rear, and Jan was bent over her. He saw with a faint sweep of a white thigh. They plastered all right, he thought. He pulled the car softly around the curves, looking at the road before him, 1 second and up at the mirror the next. He heard Jan whispering, and then he heard them both sigh. Filled with a sense of them, his muscles grew gradually taut. He sighed and sat straight up, fighting off the stiffening feeling in his loins. But soon he was slouched again. His lips are numb. I'm almost drunk, he thought. His sense of the city and park fell away. He was floating in the car, and Jan and Mary were in back, kissing, spooning. After a long time passed, Jan sat up and pulled Mary with him. It's 1 o'clock, honey, Mary said. I'd better go in. Okay, but let's drive a little more. It's great here. Father says I'm a bad girl. I'm sorry, darling. I'll call you in the morning before I go. Sure, what time? About 8:30. Gee, but I hate to see you go to Detroit. I hate to go too, but I gotta. You see, honey, I gotta make up for being bad with you down in Florida. I gotta do what Mother and Father say for a while. I hate to see you go just the same. I'll be back in a couple of days. A couple of days is a long time. You're silly, but you're sweet, she said, laughing and kissing him. You better drive on, Bigger, Jan called. He swung the car out in the park and headed for 46th Street. I'll get out here, Bigger. He stopped the car. Bigger heard them speak in whispers. Goodbye, Jan. Goodbye, honey. I'll call you tomorrow? Sure. Jan stood at the front door of the car and held out his palm. Bigger shook timidly. It's been great meeting you, Bigger, Jan said. Okay, Bigger mumbled. I'm damn glad I know you. Look, have another drink. Bigger took a big swallow. You better give me one too, Jan. It'll make me sleep, Mary said. You sure you haven't had enough? Oh, come on, honey. She got out of the car and stood on the curb. Jan gave her the bottle and she tilted it. Whoa, Jan said. What's the matter? I don't want you to pass out. I can hold it. Jan tilted the bottle and emptied it, then laid it in the gutter. He fumbled clumsily in his pockets for something. He swayed. He was drunk. You lose something, honey? Mary lisped. She too was drunk. No, I got some stuff here I want Bigger to read. Listen, Bigger, I got some pamphlets here. I want you to read them, see? Bigger held out his hand and received a small batch of booklets. Okay, I really want you to read them now. We'll have a talk about them in a couple days. His speech was thick. I'll read them, Bigger said. Sorry, I lost my spot. I'll read them, Bigger said, stifling a yawn and stuffing the booklets in his pocket. I'll see that he reads them, Mary said. Jan kissed her again. Bigger heard a loop-bounding car rumbling far down the avenue. Well, goodbye, he said. Bye, honey, Mary said. I'm going to ride up front with Bigger. She got into the front seat. The streetcar clanged to a stop. Jan swung onto it and started north. Bigger drove toward Drexel Boulevard. Mary slumped down in the seat and sighed. Her legs sprawled wide apart. The car rolled along. Bigger's head was spinning. You're very nice, Bigger, she said. He looked at her. Her face was pasty white. Her eyes were glassy. She was very drunk. I don't know, he said. My, but you say the funniest things, she giggled. Maybe, he said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You don't mind, do you? I don't mind. You know, for 3 hours, you haven't said yes or no. She doubled up with laughter. He tightened with hate. Again, she was looking inside of him, and he did not like it. She sat up and dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. He kept his eyes straight in front of him and swung the car into the driveway and brought it to a stop. He got out and opened the door. She did not move. Her eyes were closed. We're here, he said. She tried to get up and slip back into the seat. Aw, shucks. She's drunk. Really drunk, Bigger thought. She stretched out her hand. Here, give me a lift. I'm wobbly. She was resting on the small of her back, and her dress was pulled up so far that he could see where the stockings ended on her thighs. He stood looking at her for a moment. She raised her eyes and looked up at him. She laughed. Help me, Bigger. I'm stuck. He helped her, and his hands felt the softness of her body as she stepped to the ground. Her eyes looked at him feverishly from deep sockets. Her hair was in his face, filling him with his scent. He gritted his teeth, feeling a little dizzy. Where's my hat? I dropped it somewhere. She swayed as she spoke, and he tightened his arms about her, holding her up. He looked round. Her hat was lying on the running board. Here it is, he said. He picked it up and wondered what a white man would think seeing him here with her like this. And suppose old man Dalton saw him now. Apprehensively, he looked up at the big house. It was dark and silent. Well, Mary sighed, I suppose I'd better go to bed. He turned her loose, but had to catch her again to keep her off the pavement. He had led her to the steps. Can you make it? She looked at him as though she had been challenged. Sure. Turn me loose. She took his arm from her, and she mounted the steps firmly and then stumbled loudly on the wooden porch. Bigger made a move toward her, but stopped, his hands outstretched, frozen with fear. God, she'll wake up everybody. She was half bent over, resting on one knee and one hand, looking back at him in amused astonishment. That girl's crazy. She pulled up and walked out slowly, back down the steps, holding on to the rail. She swayed before him, smiling. I sure am drunk. He watched her with mingled feelings of helplessness, admiration, and hate. If her father saw him with her now, his job would be over. But she was beautiful, slender, with an air that made him feel that she did not hate him with the hate of other white people. But for all of that, she was white, and he hated her. She closed her eyes slowly and then opened them. She was trying desperately to take hold of herself. Since she was not able to get to her room alone, ought he to call Mr. Dalton or Peggy? Oh, that would betray her. And too, in spite of his hate for her, he was excited standing here watching her like this. His eyes closed again, and she swayed toward him. He caught her. I'd better help you. Let's go the back way, Bigger. I'll stumble sure as hell and wake up everyone if we go in the front. Her feet dragged on the concrete and as he led her to the basement. He switched on the light, supporting her with his free hand. I didn't know I was so drunk, she mumbled. He led her slowly up the narrow stairs and to the kitchen door, his hands circling her waist and the tips of his fingers feeling the soft swelling of her breasts. Each second she was leaning more heavily against him. Try to stand up, he whispered fiercely as they reached the kitchen door. He was thinking that perhaps Mrs. Dalton was standing in the flowing white and staring with stony blind eyes in the middle of the floor as she had been when they had come for a glass of water. He eased the back door and looked. The kitchen was empty and dark, save for a faint blue hazy light that seeped through a window from the winter sky. Come on. She pulled heavily on him, her arm about his neck. He pushed the door in and took a step inside, waiting, listening. He felt her hair brush his lips. His skin glowed warm and his muscles flexed. He looked at her face in the dim light, his senses drunk with the odor of her hair and her skin. He stood for a moment, then whispered in excitement and fear, "Come on, you got to get to your room." He led her out of the kitchen into the hallway. He had to walk her a step at a time. The hall was empty and dark. Slowly, he half walked and half dragged her to the back stairs. Again, he hated her. He shook her. "Come on, wake up." She did not move or open her eyes. Finally, she mumbled something and swayed limply. His fingers felt the soft curves of her body, and he was still, looking at her, enveloped in a sense of physical elation. That little bitch, he thought. Her face was touching his. He turned her around and began to mount the steps one by one. He heard a slight creaking and stopped. He looked, straining his eyes in the gloom, but there was no one. When he got to the top of the steps, she was completely limp and was still trying to mumble something. God damn! He could move her only by lifting her bodily. He caught her with his arms and carried her down the hall, then paused. Which was her door? God damn, where's your room? He whispered. She did not answer. Was she completely out? He could not leave her here. If he took his hands from her, she would sink to the floor and lie there all night. He shook her hard, speaking as loudly as he dared. "Where's your room?" Momentarily, she roused and looked at him with blank eyes. "Where's your room?" She rolled her eyes towards the door. He got as far as the door and stopped. And that's where I will stop. Page 84, top of 84. She rolled her eyes towards the door and stopped. There are 9 pages left in book 1, and Mary is going to die in those 9 pages. Don't you want to know how? You should, because it's on the test. How does Mary die? We'll find out.